we're meeting twice, so today and the day after Election Day, next week. And we've done the introductions. I'm going to go through a brief history of book publishing because, believe it or not, the way things got started is still has repercussions today. And if you understand the beginning, you can understand where we are now, or at least that's my hope. We're going to go over what you need to publish a book that can be sold to the public. We're going to go over private publishing as well, which would be books that you don't intend to sell. And there are reasons to do that. We're going to go over very quickly the 5 most important paths to publishing, and then I want to save time at the end. Make sure you time me so that, you know.
How much time do you want?
Maybe, let's say 15 minutes.
Okay.
Your questions, and you're going to have a tiny homework assignment. It won't take you very long. And I also want to know if when we get to the end, if there are specific things pertinent to your project that you would like me to spend some time on the second time we get together. In the part 2, which is next Wednesday, we're going to go through the details. We're going to get more into the nitty-gritty, get our hands dirty. I'm going to go over covers and how to think about them. Text design, which is the way that words are laid on a page on the inside of a book and how important that is. About editing and what you need to do if you decide you're going to do this on your own to be able to accomplish those things to sell a book to the public. We're going to talk a lot more about private publishing, which is, I hear this oftentimes from authors. They will say, it's not about the money, I don't care about sales. And if that's really true, there are reasons to do this privately. And then we're going to save some time for your questions and any topics that any of you may want to cover. So we're going to go back in time to the year 1438. This is the last year that writers control everything about their creativity. If you were a writer in 1438 or even before that, if you wanted to publish a book, you were responsible for everything. You were responsible for buying the pens, the ink, the paper, or the vellum, or likely vellum if you were in Western Europe. You were the one who put all the words on the page. This is an illustrated ABC, by the way, the letter S. I love illustrated manuscripts. Don't know as I'd want to write one by hand totally, but I love illustrated manuscripts. If you wanted to sell the book, you were responsible for having it bound, and you were responsible for the sale, and you took the money. So you controlled everything. Of course, there's a downside to this, which is that you can only produce one book at a time. And it's a highly laborious process. If any of you have ever had to sit down and copy a page of a book, you will know how long it took to do this. And then in 1439, the year after that, the world, at least Western European history, got hit by a meteor. And that meteor's name was Johann Gutenberg. Johann Gutenberg was a genius. He was a metallurgist. He was a blacksmith. He understood the properties of gold. He was also a really terrible businessman, which often happens with people who are highly creative. In 1439, he got caught in a rather shaky scheme, shall we say. He supposedly was part of a partnership that was producing highly polished mirrors. And the mirrors supposedly would reflect the holy light from relics in a church. Didn't work. It kind of failed. He was not the money man in that. He was the inventor in that process. And the people who were backing him financially were a little upset. And he said, you know, I have something else I've been working on. It's been a secret, but you know, maybe we can get together and do this. This was not just movable type. This was not just a printing press. This was an entire system of printing. He touched every aspect of all the books that you have ever touched. He has touched every aspect of that pen you're holding in your hand, the paper that you're writing on. This man was a full-fledged genius. At the time, the paper processing was really rather varied, shall we say. Paper had no uniform sizes, and it did not have a uniform surface. So writing on paper was a sort of catch-as-catch-can process. Ink was water-based, not oil-based. If you take a drop of water and you put it on a piece of paper, it immediately goes into the paper. Oil will sit on the surface. That is very important in printing. You don't want the ink to seep all the way through to the other side. He created a mold called a matrix in which you could produce the same letter over and over and over and over again. When you think about the number of letter E's that are on a single page of a book, this is very key. He was the one who developed the metals that go into hot, this stuff. I'm going to pass this around. This is what gets used in a printing press like the one that Gutenberg invented. If you want to make these, you have a mold. This is the letter V. It looks like a capital letter V. If you want to make several of these, you use a mold and you produce as many of these as you want. When they get worn, you put them in a pot and you melt them down. And the reason why they melt so easily is the metals that he chose to put together are tin, lead, and something called antimony, A-N-T-I-M-O-N-Y. Don't ask me what it is, I have no clue. But people, there are still a lot of artists who work with this kind of type today. That ratio and the metals that he chose are still used today. Hasn't changed. So I'm going to pass this around so you can take a look at it. He also took a wine press and figured out how to use that so that it would take ink and press it onto paper after the ink had been applied to letters. When you print anything, and it doesn't matter which way you print, the way that the ink toner touches the page is key to the entire printing process. You want it to, as printers say, you want it to kiss the page, because you don't want to make it too hard, or you punch holes in the paper, or you emboss the paper so you can actually read it almost like Braille on the other side. You don't want it to be too light, because then the printing can't be read. The human eye likes very clean edges when it comes to letters. We like contrast. We like things to be clear. If you're going to read a book of fuzzy type, guarantee you won't get past page 1. So the reason why he was a meteor is the fact that now, instead of doing one book at a time, you could do as many books as you wanted. He was the one who created the mass production of ideas. Historians credit his inventions, not necessarily him, but his inventions, with ushering in the Reformation, the Renaissance. He had as big an impact on culture and world history as the internet has. That's been the second big revolution that we've had. There's one thing that always gets left out of the Gutenberg story, though, is how writers and readers, their relationship, how it changed. Because printing presses are big, they're expensive, they take skills and talent to run, and you cannot produce one copy at a time. So the economics of mass production of books slipped out of the control of writers. And it stayed out of the control of writers for over 500 years. This is one of my personal heroes. This is William Caxton. You all read and write in the English language, and the fact that you can do that is because of him. He is, without being too equivocal about it, he is the founder of the written English language. Man, it's amazing. He was probably, nobody's quite sure where and when he was born, but the probability is it was somewhere in Kent, and it was around 1422. He was apprenticed to a textile merchant. That much we do know about his life. And he was brilliant enough to not only write and read in English, he could write and read in French. Of course, at that point in time, French was the language of law. It was the language of commerce, not English. He was the first one to translate a work of fiction into the English language. It was actually a romance novel. Took place during the Trojan War. It was in French. He translated it into English. He also translated the first nonfiction book into English. It was how-to on how to play chess. He was on a business trip in Cologne where he first saw a printing press. And he was a smart enough, unlike Gutenberg, this guy was a businessman. And he looked at that printing press and he saw a business opportunity. Little bells went off. He was friends with some of the nobility who were living in Belgium at the time, and one of them was an English woman who had married the Emperor of Austria, if I remember correctly, and she encouraged him to create a printing press and bring it to England. So he had a printing press built in Bruges, Belgium, and he had it shipped to England. He set it up in Westminster. If you've ever been to Westminster Abbey, there's a tiny little church right next to it called St. Mary's. He was a member of St. Mary's Church, and that his first printing press was set up very close to that. When we were on our trip to England, I was like standing on holy ground. I was so excited. His very first book, the very first book that he printed, was The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, as I said, he was a businessman. When he got to England, he realized that he had a problem. And the problem was this. If you speak a language and that's all you're doing, it doesn't matter how you spell anything. You can spell the word apple, A-P-P-L-E, A-P-P-E-L, A-P-I-L-L-E. You can go on and on and on. So if I say, Pat, do you want an apple? You don't care how I spell it. But if I'm going to write you a letter or send you an email and say, Pat, do you want an apple? You and I have to agree how the word apple is spelled so that you can understand what I am saying. So he gets to England, and there are so many dialects, and there is so many what we would call alternative spellings. There are so many ways to put grammar together, sentences together, that he's printing books that he wants to sell to a large number of readers. You can't do that if you have to do a book for every dialect in the city of London, just London alone. So he's in the west of London. He couldn't sell books in the east of London unless he standardized language. So forget Samuel Johnson and Noah Webster. Those guys came afterwards, and they picked up what Caxton and the printers who followed him actually did. They standardized spelling. They're the ones who are responsible for punctuation, paragraph indents, grammar. He's also, by the way, the person who's responsible for the fact that we use O-U-G-H in words like enough, thought, through, though. O-U-G-H, we pronounce it 4 different ways. It was something he had picked up from one of the languages that he spoke when he was in Belgium, so that's why we have still those remnants in our language. We spell the word ghost, which is appropriate for today, with a G-H because of him. So he started setting standards. We don't think about this. Readers never think about how books are laid out or how the words are laid out on a page. But we depend on visual cues, not just the words, but visual cues to understand how we are moving through a book. One of the big ones is if you're moving forward in time or backward in time, there's often a large space between a paragraph of one time era and the paragraph of another time era, so that we understand as readers how we do this. You open up a dictionary, and the word that's being defined is in bold type. It sticks out into the margin from everything else, and we pick up the words that way. All visual cues, all started by printers. You know those bumper stickers that say, if you can read this, thank a teacher? If your teacher can read this, you ought to thank a printer, because they're the ones who started all of this. Like I said, one of my heroes. So this is where publishing began. These are 2 trays of like the type that I'm sending around for all of you. By the way, this is the origin of uppercase and lowercase. When you hand set type, the uppercase letters are on a slant like this in front of you, and the lowercase letters are down here. I understand in New York City, when all newspapers were actually done with hand set type, they used to have contests in the streets between typesetters to see who could hand set type the fastest. They actually had a guy, I understand, who could do it blindfolded. He had done it for so long, he could actually pick the right letters up. So one of the things that we're going to talk about here is I want you to understand, a lot of you are writing, or you're interested in writing, or you're doing some sort of writing. There's a huge difference between writing and publishing. They're related to one another, but they have very different functions. Writing is an art. It's a skill. It's a talent. It's something you can cultivate if you're not born with it innately, and I'm not sure how you get born with it innately, but I guess you can. Publishing is a business. Publishing is about money. Publishing has always been about money. And if you can understand that, you hopefully will not get lost along the way. This thing is called a chase. This is part of hand-setting type. You pick up those letters and you put them in here upside down and backwards so that when they're printed they come out right side and forwards. Everything that's on a book page at this point in time was picked up and put in there by hand, including this little guy. Anybody know what this is?
Leading.
I'm sorry?
Is it leading?
Yes, very good.
What is it?
Can you want to explain what leading is?
The space between lines.
Yep, the space between lines. The reason why we can read is that there's a certain amount of air, which is what designers always call it, between the bottom of one line of words and the top of the next line of words. Key thing, leading, can come in several different sizes. As you can imagine, this is an expensive process. It's very time-consuming. It's very expensive. It costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of skill. So when you've done all of this work here, because that's just 4 lines of type, and you take those 4 lines of type and you add it to more lines, and then you have a page, then you have several pages. By the time you've done all of that, it doesn't make any economic sense to print 1 copy of anything. You have to print several copies of something in order for it to make economic sense. This is the origin of publishing. And all of this, still today, is referred to as setup costs. In printing, there's an expression, or in publishing, there's an expression that says, setup cost is the bulk of what it costs to print a book. If you're doing it like this, or you're doing it even digitally, setting up what you want to print takes the bulk of the time. After that, it's just paper and ink, which is relatively cheap. So this means that if you're going to go to all the trouble to set all of this type, before you do anything else, you need to decide how many copies of that book are you going to print. That's the origin of the term print run. As I said, it takes a long time. Print runs run the publishing industry. Printing is the parent of the publishing industry and the book selling industry. When things first started back in William Caxton's time, and actually almost all the way through Jane Austen, which is the early 1800s, printers were it. They printed the books, they selected the books that were going to be printed, they bound the books, they put the books on their shelves, and they sold them. So they functioned in all 3 capacities: printing, publishing, and book selling. Somewhere between Jane Austen and Charles Dickens, things began to change and shift, and this began to split. Printers, they just want to print. That's how they make their money, is by making multiple copies of a book. They didn't necessarily want to deal with authors. They didn't want to have to pay authors. They didn't want to have to select books. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to offload that risk. That's where publishing was born. Publishers are actually venture capitalists. They underwrite the success or failure of a book. And then book selling split off of that, because a single printer and a single publisher are only going to do 1 line of books, but people want more than that. So bookstores started opening. So you could have books that were printed over here in your store, from over here in your store, from over here in your store. So your readers had a wide selection to choose from. That's all changing, as we all know. So some of this process, now we're into print runs, and we're into large quantities. In 1875, the offset printing process was invented. That's even faster than the hand platen press, much faster than the hand platen press. It also meant that the size of print runs increased, because once you hit the on button for an offset press, before you can hit the off button, you've probably printed 100 copies of something. It really goes that fast. If you ever get the chance, I don't think they don't do it anymore. They're not printing their own newspaper. But you could walk into the back of the Valley News and watch them print. And when I worked there and we were proofing the paper, you really had to be quick in order to get less than 100 copies of the newspaper from hitting the on button to the off button. It's really fast. By 1901 to 1907, offset printing was now ruling the printing process. This is a date, and I always find it interesting that it's exactly 500 years from the last time that writers had control of their publishing process, when things began to change. Though nobody really quite understood it at the time, this guy named Chester Carlson took some ideas that were developed in Eastern Europe about a process called xerographic printing that uses static electricity, believe it or not. And you'll notice this right here. That is the origin of the Xerox Corporation. Yeah. Xerox is a huge name to know in the printing process and in the publishing process, because for the first time, you can make one copy of something at a time. That's key. And then in 1949, we're going to talk about vanity publishing, what I call vanity publishing and self-publishing. This is where it started in 1949 with a company called Vantage Press. Those of you who have got the same color hair that I do may remember ads for Vantage Press. The thing of it is they didn't have a different way of printing than anybody else. So one of the things about Vantage Press, and we're going to get into a lot of things about vanity publishing, is that in order to be able to publish your book through something like Vantage Press, you had to buy 1,000 copies of your book. And most of them went into your basement or your garage or your attic, and they got very dusty and very moldy, and they never sold. In 1953, we have a printer that runs with a UNIVAC computer. You can now print one copy of an original document at a time. Xerox comes in. They're bringing this idea to the public. The first laser printer was developed by the Xerox Corporation in 1971. In 1977, those little printers that you have on your desks at home, that's where they first appeared. And then somewhere around 1990 into 1994 is when the World Wide Web really started to take hold. This is the second big print revolution. In '94, whether you love him or hate him, Jeff Bezos founded Amazon.com. Did you ever hear the story about how he came to sell books? Because that's where Amazon started, was books. He was at a conference about the World Wide Web, and people were talking about how, I think he was in banking at the time, people were talking about how the World Wide Web could be monetized, how it could be used to sell things. And there was a list of 10 different pieces of merchandise, different types of merchandise that could be sold over the web. Number 9 was books. And Bezos looked at that list and he put a little asterisk next to it, because his figuring was, books are easy to send. They don't break. You don't have to have a size for them. You can describe them in words because they are words. What a great place to start. That's how Amazon came to be. In 1997, the Ingram Corporation established a company called Lightning Source, and I'm going to talk about Lightning Source quite a bit because this is who I use and I know them really well. What they did, first of all, I want to explain who Ingram is. Ingram is the single largest book distributor in North America. So every bookstore that I know of uses the Ingram database. So if you go into the Norwich bookstore and you say, I would like, what is it in English? You say, I would like a copy of The Opulence of Invention, but it's not on their shelf. And they go over to the computer and they look at the computer and order it. What they're looking for is the ISBN and that title, and it's on the Ingram database. This is a huge name to know. Lightning Source was started as a way to offer publishers the digital printing of books. So they could print one book at a time for you. We are now back to 1438. We can now print one copy of one book at a time. This is an amazing revolution. In 1999, iUniverse is founded. This is the direct ancestor of Vantage Press. This was the first self-publishing company in the United States to take advantage of the benefits of digital printing. And then in 2005, CreateSpace, which was a separate company, was bought by Amazon. These two, right here, CreateSpace and Lightning Source, are used by independent publishers all over the world, including all of the big name traditional publishers. Everybody's using them now. Everybody always thinks of publishing as what the bestseller is, and you know, the newest trend. I want to know about raising my own chickens. I want to know about feng shui. I want to read Harry Potter. People think of publishing as being controlled by that sort of thing, but it isn't. Publishing has always been controlled by printing technology, and how printing technology changes has a direct impact on publishing. Nowadays, because of all of the different avenues to publishing that we're going to be talking about, somewhere between, nobody's quite sure of the numbers because Amazon does not reveal numbers, somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million different titles are published every year. That's a lot of books. I don't know about you, but I can barely get through 50 in a year, and I really push. One of the things that the publishing industry did, and we're thinking back to William Caxton, is it set standards for readers. The reason why we can read books so easily was because of years and years and years of printers figuring out how we physically read and being able to make books more comfortable for readers. So we're at a crossroads now. We have been at this crossroads actually for quite a while. Writers want to have control of their own creative process. Writers want to be able to control how their book looks, at least they think they do, and how it reads. Writers want this. It's just like every creative individual. Painters want this, dancers want this. You know, that's what creativity is. I'm a quilter in addition to everything else that I do. And I would not like somebody coming in and telling me how I was going to make a quilt, or what colors I was going to put in. That's my creative process. But the other side of that is that if you don't understand what those standards are, the books come out looking very unprofessional. They're amateur. And we're awash in books that are awful. So where do we go from here? These are the 5 primary paths to publishing that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. I'm not going to go into them in depth, except for this one right here. And we're going to save that actually for our next class, where I'm going to get into things more in depth. Traditional publishing is the one that we all grew up with. Even you can. Traditional publishing is HarperCollins, W.W. Norton, St. Martin's Press, Wiley Publishing. It's every publishing company, that, even the older ones that don't even exist anymore. Harper and Row doesn't exist anymore though. Appalachian Mountain Club, Chelsea Green over in Vermont. Those are traditional publishing companies. They're the ones who set the standards. They're the ones who evolved out of the printing, publishing, book-selling split. Self-publishing companies, and we're going to get into this a little bit, self-publishing companies are the direct ancestors of Vantage Press. Independent publishing means that authors take hold of the entire publishing process, and there are lots of ways to do this so that you can produce your own books. There's electronic publishing, which is the new kid on the block. Ebooks, Kindle. They were the pioneer in that, and continue to be the pioneer in that. And then there is now, this is the newest one actually, is private publishing. Being able to access companies online who provide you with software that helps you create a book that you can print. This is amazing stuff, folks. So, how do you choose? Where do you go? What do you want to do? That's a huge question. And the basic question that you need to answer is, what do you want to do with your book? If you sit and imagine yourself holding your finished book, it's got a cover. This is my second novel about a fictional town in Vermont called Carding. You're holding your book in your hand. You feel really good about it. Believe me, there's no bigger thrill than the mail carrier showing up with a box from Lightning Source, and I get to look at my finished book. I love that moment. I started to do a little dance around the yard. So now I've got my book in my hand. What do I want to do with it? Where do I want to sell it? This is not privately published. I publish this for readers. So that's what I want to do with my book. But if you want to write a children's book for your grandchildren, and it's just for your grandchildren, your choices are going to be different than mine. So you need to know, you always start at the end. What do you want to do with your book? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to be able to give it away? Is it to commemorate an important anniversary? Is it a cookbook? Is it a mystery novel? All of these have direct implications as to how you're going to choose to publish your book, or not. Sometimes people decide they're not going to do this. So what do you need to be a publisher? Two things. You need a credit card, because you got to pay for it all. Publishing your own book, I will tell you right now, is not cheap. And you need ISBNs. That's it. You're done. That's all you need, believe it or not. You don't even have to choose a company name if you don't want to. If you want to publish with just your name on there, you can. You will notice on all of my books, did I do it on this one? Yes, I did. There's a little company name right there, Full Circle Press, LLC. That's me. You're looking at the entire company. I used to use it to publish books for other authors, but I don't do that anymore. The reason why, and I'm set up with the Secretary of State's office in Vermont, and the reason why I did that, and this may be something that you choose to do or not, is that I was publishing books for other authors. So if one of those authors did something to offend someone and they were going to be brought to court, I did not want to be dragged in with them. So I set up that protective thing. It's also a tax thing. It also gives me a little more legitimacy. But you don't have to do that. If you don't want to set yourself up in either New Hampshire or Vermont as an LLC or any type of a corporation, you don't have to do that. But this is really important. The International Standard Book Number. It's this. On the back of every single book with a barcode. I'm going to tell you what this number means. 978 means it was this book. And this is from one of mine, I think. 978 means it was printed in North America. The 0 means it was printed in English. This number right here, 9790046, that is the number for Full Circle Press. And these are check digits, so that each one of the books that comes out from Full Circle Press has a completely different number. This is the money number. This is the number that appears in the Ingram database. It's the number that gets scanned when you purchase a book in a bookstore. It's the number that Amazon uses. It's the number that gets your money back to you. These are really important. And as we go further on, you're going to find out that how ISBNs are used is key to understanding whether somebody is a legitimate company or not. If you're going out onto the web and you decide you want to deal with another publishing company, how these get used is a key. Very, very key. We did that. We did all that money stuff. This is the only place in the United States where you can buy legitimate ISBN numbers. Belker If you've ever been in the library and you've looked at books in print, that's Bowker. They do an awful lot of other things, but Bowker is the only legitimate, I'm going to say this again because it's really important, they're the only legitimate seller of ISBNs in the United States. There's one set up in every single country that applies, that uses this. China is not part of this, they don't care. Bowker is when you go in and you can buy ISBNs. You can buy a single ISBN if you want to. I think they're $125 each. Or you can buy 10. I always recommend that you buy 10. Because if you want to do a book on paper and an ebook with the same novel, that's 2 ISBNs. If you decide you want to do a book on paper and an ebook and an audiobook, that's 3 ISBNs. Every medium requires its own ISBN. The reason why I keep emphasizing the fact that this is the only legitimate place is there's a lot of places out there that will sell you bogus ISBNs. If you just Google ISBNs, you're going to get a number of hits. Just always go here first. And they also have ways of being able to help publicize your book. It's a huge website. This is a great big deal. And it's definitely worth doing, in my opinion. So we're going to start with traditional publishing because these guys set the standard. So what does a publisher do for a writer? They are venture capitalists. They are underwriting the cost. If we were back in Gutenberg's time, they'd be underwriting the cost of taking all those letters by hand and putting them into the chase. They would be underwriting the cost for anything that you needed to do with offset printing. They underwrite the cost of printing. They underwrite the cost of editing. They underwrite the cost of having a cover illustration made and a cover created. If you buy artwork to put on a cover, they pay for it. They pay for the warehousing because if you have printed 2,500 copies of a book, you just can't put them in a closet somewhere. You have to have some place that is that protects the books, so the books don't get dusty, so they don't get eaten by mice, so they don't get moldy. They're responsible for paying off the royalties. They're responsible for marketing, such as it is, and we will get to that. Their job is to take the manuscript, the raw material that an author has created, and make a finished product out of it. That's their job. Most of them are actually pretty good at it. In fact, most of them are excellent at it. And they have to do it always in mind with what's good for the reader. Once a manuscript leaves a writer's hand, the writer, in a lot of ways, doesn't count anymore. I'm sad to say. A lot of writers get upset about this, but it's true. Because what they're doing is they're aiming at the reader. The way a book is printed, the size of a book, the cover, everything is made so it attracts readers. That's their business. When I worked for Countryman Press in Woodstock, Vermont, I was their marketing manager, and I sat in sales meetings all the time. Sales meetings were where the decision about whether to accept a book for publication or not were made. I one time made the remark that I felt like I had gone to a casino in Las Vegas because the chances of you picking a winner were just as good as your chances of picking a loser. Next week I'm going to bring in some query letters, by the way, actual query letters that came into Countryman Press so you can hear what it is that we actually saw. This is not an easy process. Sometimes it's very, very easy. Generally speaking, in the industry, it's thought that agents make decisions, and agents are really sort of the ones who cull the massive books that come into publishers anymore. The decision whether to accept a book or not is actually made in the first 7 seconds. That's it. So we selected titles for saleability and quality. We also selected titles that fit the kind of publisher that we were. Countryman Press never published science fiction. We got hundreds of queries about science fiction books. We never published poetry. We used to get queries about poetry all the time. We didn't publish romance novels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we were selecting titles for their saleability, the quality of the writing, and also I should have put something else there, was their subject matter. Was it the kind of book that we could sell? Publishers underwrite the author's work with advances. And advances is short for advance on royalties. This is not a gift, though sometimes it turns out to be that. An advance is an amount of money that is paid when an author signs a contract. You get $1,000, $2,500, $8,000. The big ones are $100,000 and up. That is what you need to earn back through sales of your book. That's not as easy as it looks. They pay for any legal costs. They pay for the ISBNs. They pay for all of this stuff, and they pay for distribution, which is the cost of getting books to bookstores. Bookstores do not pay for the shipping costs. The publishers pay for the shipping costs. So they need to do that. They make their money by sales to readers. And writers pay back their advances from the royalties that they are paid. Guess which one of these groups gets paid the greatest share of the profit on a book? Yeah. These are the benefits. This is no cost to a writer, virtually. They have greater access to professionals who do all of the work to get a book ready for readers. They have much greater access to bookstores and libraries. They do not have greater access to Amazon. Amazon puts every book out there equally on their pages. What you do pay for with Amazon is better placement. You can do that through paying for some of their marketing stuff, but you can do that as I can do that, just same as W.W. Norton does that. You know, just depends on which one you pay for. They're more likely to be reviewed in the media, and authors get bragging rights. I've been published by W.W. Norton. I've been published by HarperCollins. These are the downsides. Authors lose their copyright. And I want to take a minute to explain exactly what copyright is, because there's a lot of mythology that goes around this. You have to break this into two words, copy and right. A copyright is the right to make copies of an author's work. That's all it is, but it's also everything. It doesn't mean if I wrote a couple of books for Wiley, I wrote a couple of books for W.W. Norton, it doesn't mean that I'm not recognized as the author of those words. I am. My name is out there as part of the copyright. What I don't have is the right to make copies of my work and sell it. I can't do that. They can. I can't. You often lose control over the final product. So, and this is really publisher by publisher. I've been very lucky. The publishers that I've worked with have been very careful about making sure that I was part of the process and that I agreed with what was going on. That isn't necessarily the case. There are a lot of publishers who basically take an author's work and then tell the author to sit down and shut up, and they literally mean that. Go away. We're going to take care of everything else. You can't sell your books in a bookstore. You can't put your book on Amazon. You can't do that. By contract, you cannot do this. If you want to attract a bookstore's attention, you bring your book in, you try to talk to the bookstore, show them that it's a legitimate book, get them interested, but they're going to buy directly from, well, probably Ingram, and then through Ingram to the publisher. You can't do that. Most author contracts allow a certain number of authored copies. It's usually around 50. And those are part of your contract. You get 50 books in the mail. After that, you have to purchase copies of your books. And most of the time, it's about 40%, as a 40% discount off the retail price. It used to be that once, the average novel in this country, written by a first-time author, has a print run of about 2,500 copies. And if, they sell really big the first year, they don't sell quite so good in the second year, and by the third year they're not selling at all. And so the well, publisher decides to put it out of print, which means they no longer own the copyright to it anymore. That's the way it used to work. It doesn't work that way anymore because now that book is put into digital printing. They make a PDF out of it, a publishing document format. They make a PDF out of it, they keep it on a digital printer somewhere, and they can print copies as they're needed. So you never get your rights back. Your heirs never get your rights back. If a publisher goes bankrupt, your book is an asset. It gets sold to whoever buys that company. You don't have any control over that anymore. And this is a big one. In spite of the fact that publishing likes to brag that they market their books, every writer will tell you they don't. You are responsible for most of your marketing. You are responsible for paying for most of your marketing. You're over here nodding. You've seen this before.
I'm glad I can present because I have to go in and do that all the time to sell these books.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of my friends is the writer Sarah Stewart Taylor, who lives over in Hotland, and she wrote a series. I think there were actually 3 that came out of her mysteries. I know she's writing children's books now. She switched over. But she did and paid for all of the marketing for her novels, including trips to California and talking to bookstores and setting up the signings. Sarah did all of that. In fact, when publishers are looking at authors now, they're trying to figure out if you're already marketing. Do you have a website? How many followers do you have? Have you published your own book before? How many did you sell? And believe me, they can look that up with a click of a finger. So let's do the math for traditional publishing. We're going to just take a book that I made up. This is a $20 book. You need to know several things about books. You need to know how many pages they are. And just to be clear, because a lot of people in publishing do not know this, a single piece of paper is 2 pages. And it doesn't matter whether it's blank or not. It's 2 pages. So they need to know how many pages. In order to be able to figure this out, you need to know how many pages it is. Is it black and white? Does it have color? Printing a page in color is 3 times the cost of a page in black and white. You need to know the outside dimensions of the book. This one is 6 by 9, and this one is 8.5 by 11. They're both paperbacks, and they're both perfect bound. Perfect bound means that it's glued here. So we're going to start with a retail price of $20. And within the entire industry, and this includes online booksellers, there's a thing called the standard trade discount. It is 55% off the cost of the retail price. That is kept by the bookseller. No questions asked. You don't get a chance to discuss this at all. It's non-negotiable. So out of our $20 book, the minute it's sold, we've lost $11. We're down to $9. The publisher's expense, I actually went on Lightning Source and figured out how much this book would have cost to print and ship, a single copy, was $7.63. If I was a traditional publisher, I would probably keep $1 of what's left over for my profit. And this is the royalty for the author, right here, 37 cents. That's not unusual. The average royalty runs between about 30 cents to $1.25, and it really depends on your contract, the type of book, the expenses of the book. It depends on a lot of things. Yeah, 35 to $1.25. And you don't receive any more royalties until your advance is paid. And that you're doing it at 37 cents per book. That takes a lot of books. It's 10 after 10. Shall we take a break?
Yeah.
Okay, these are the folks who got me into doing this. After I left Countryman Press in Woodstock, they were sold to W.W. Norton. And they moved all of the marketing down to New York. Pretty much it was the first thing that they did. And so I went out as a freelancer. And I was doing magazine work, and I also knew how to do covers. I had learned how to design type. I learned a lot being a countryman, actually. And my name must have been out there in the ozone somewhere, because every so often, somebody would call whom I didn't know, and they would say, I have a friend who says you know about publishing. And we would start having conversations. Well, one day, this woman called with that kind of a question, and she had been published by one of the major publishers. She got a pretty good advance. They would not even take a look at her second book. And so she had gone to a self-publishing company. I think it was iUniverse, but I'm not sure I remember that correctly. And she was in tears on the phone, talking to me. Why didn't that publisher want to publish my second book? How do I get my rights back? They did a terrible job. iUniverse did a terrible job. And they won't give me back my book. What do I do? And I said, well, first of all, did you earn your advance back from your publisher? She said, no. And I said, the hardest book to sell in publishing is the second book by an author who did not earn their advance back on their first book. Oh, and I said, did you sign a contract with iUniverse? She goes, yes. I said, did you look at the copyright piece? She goes, no, I just signed the contract and sent them money. And I said, I'm sorry to tell you, but you are stuck. And she said to me, why doesn't anybody tell people those things? So that's how come I got started doing this, because I hate these people. I just really hate these people. Self-publishing companies, and there are a number of them. These are the bigger ones that are over here. These are all the imprints and divisions of something called Author Solutions. Author Solutions is the parent company of iUniverse, Ex Libris, Trafford, Author House, and I can never remember the name of the fifth one. I don't know why. Maybe Palibrio. Anyway, they will, if you go to any of their websites, please promise me you will not give them your contact information, because they will haunt you for the rest of your life. I have a friend who lives in Lebanon whose father wanted to publish a memoir, and this was way back at the beginning of this stuff. So Frank went to, I think it was Ex Libris, and helped his dad publish his memoir. His dad's been gone for several years now. Frank still gets calls from Ex Libris trying to get him to publish another book with them. Their customer is you. Their customer is the author who doesn't know any better, who's vulnerable, who just wants to see their book in print. They are awful. They overcharge for books, they overcharge for printing, they overcharge for services which are shoddy. They especially overcharge for marketing. One of the other conversations I had with an author who had gotten herself into this mess was the fact that she had spent something like $10,000 on marketing through them. This many sales. Author Solutions was owned by Penguin Pearson, which is the single largest book publisher in the world now, for a period of time. They thought that they were going to be able to use this as a moneymaker. And the thing of it is these companies have such a horrible reputation, they get sued repeatedly. Author Solution has been the subject of several class action lawsuits, 2 of them big ones that were successful. There is a website and a newsletter. I'm going to direct you to this, because if you just want to read interesting stories about publishing, this is great. It's called Writer Beware. The newsletter is written by a woman named Victoria Strauss, and this woman can tell a story about all the scams and the thievery going on in publishing like you just wouldn't believe. She's really good. She is part of the Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Writers Guild of America, and they maintain an excellent list of dodgy publishing companies, dodgy agents, dodgy. If you have any question at all about something you're investigating, you definitely want.
What's the name? Victoria Strauss?
Victoria Strauss is her name.
Strauss.
Strauss. She's the author. But you definitely want to Google Writer Beware. It'll take you right there. Sign up for her newsletter. She only writes when she has something to write about, so it's not like you're going to get something in your email every time. But I'll tell you, some of these stories, they're amazing. When you sign a contract with them, you lose total control of your book. And there's no way to get it back. People have tried. People have sued them to get their work back. One of the things that they do is they create the files. In other words, if they do any editing at all, even though you're paying for it, if they do the editing, if they create the inside of the book, if they do the text design, if they create the cover, you are paying for that. But you don't get those files. They don't belong to you. They won't give them to you. I have one of my longtime most favorite clients is a gentleman who's now 93 years old. When I first met him, he was in his late 80s. And he had done 2 books with iUniverse, I think it was. And he wanted to have control of them himself, and he wanted to do ebooks, and he was savvy enough to understand that this place was not a good place to be. So he came to me and we talked about this, and I said, you do realize you signed a contract, and if you republish your books, if you do something else with them, you're in violation of the contract. And his reply was, I'm 88 years old, let him come and get me. So what we did was we renamed his books. We bought him his own ISBNs, we put his own ISBNs on them, and we put them out there. And I'm not gonna, what did I say this? Nobody's ever contacted him. So, you can ignore this if you want. If they find out about it, they're stinky enough that they might try to cause you some trouble. But at this point in time, they are slowly but surely, it looks like, going out of business. The way that people can tell is that they're not buying as many ISBNs or using as many ISBNs as they used to. So it seemed, and they were also the object of 2 class action lawsuits that cost them a lot of money. What else bad can I say? Please don't do this. If I convince you of nothing else over 2 days, please don't do this. And be aware that Author Solutions is only one small part of this. There are all kinds of dodgy publishers out there who will promise you the world and not deliver a single thing. Remember when I said that the ISBN was key to understanding how a lot of this stuff worked? You cannot use your own ISBN in any of these companies. If you go to a company and they absolutely refuse to let you use your own ISBN, if you want to independently publish, go away. Just walk away, because that controls the financial destiny of your book. Really, that's one of the most key things. There's a book called, let me think, the name of it is called The Fine Print. And, oh, Sue, you'll love this book. It was written by a lawyer. And, oh God, I can't remember his name. I think it's in its 7th edition now. I've got the 5th edition. It's a wonderful book because he goes through all of these types of companies, explains what the contracts are saying, explains what the contracts are doing, and tells you how badly you're going to get ripped off if you go there. But it's a fascinating way to actually look at publishing and understand publishing a little bit more. So I recommend the book for that. It's not as dry as it sounds. Or either that or I'm just a wicked nerd.
What is it called again?
It's called The Fine Print.
Okay.
I think it's The Fine Print of Publishing is the correct name. And by the way, it was an independently published book.
So you don't control the ISBN in self-publishing, but you also don't control it in traditional publishing.
That's right. That's right. The key difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing is that traditional publishers are going to pay you. You pay them. That's the key difference, actually. And also, traditional publishers do a lot of things very, 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 very well. I sound like I'm being disrespectful. I'm really not. I'm just always a little hesitant because they're not all they're cracked up to be or all that people believe that they are. Yeah.
So are you paying them upfront?
Oh, yeah.
So you pay them upfront to do the work before
Yeah.
they've done it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's an upfront fee. I knew somebody who just went through this. There's an upfront fee. I think it's like $2,500. It's not an inexpensive way to go. There's a lot less expensive ways to go. And then you have 6 months to change your mind. Problem was, is when she and I had our conversation, she was like in her 7th month, so she ended up going through them, so it's really held stuck. This is what I do. Yes, Emma, I'm sorry.
What about the very small independent publishers? There's one out of Bennington, Vermont, called Images from the Past.
Oh, yeah, I know her.
You know, Taurus Islard?
Yeah.
Who was still alive and kicking. But they give you an editor, you have a designer. But in order to sell your books, they give you a certain amount. Then you have to buy any books. But I could sell them if I go to a presentation. I've been to many
Yeah.
schools.
You have to understand, I'm talking as though these things all have clear lines of delineation. There are all sorts of little arrangements that can be made in there. I do know that press, she is legitimate.
Yeah, she is legitimate.
Yes.
She's a paying sometimes, and she charges down to every cent of tax when she sends me books that I need to buy to take to a school or something.
Yeah.
But she's a character.
Yeah, small publishers, just to give you a little bit of a definition here, and we're going to talk about traditional publishing again for just a second. A large publisher does several hundred titles a year. So somebody like Penguin Pearson, HarperCollins, W.W. Norton, they're doing, Wiley Publishing, they do hundreds of titles a year. Fiction, nonfiction, and a lot of stuff in between. Most of them act and function in exactly the same way. You know, there are some differences among them, but most of them are the same way. You get down to medium-sized publishers, which are considered anywhere between, and this is rough, between 25 titles to 100 titles a year. That's considered a mid-sized publisher. And sometimes, I mean, when I worked for Countryman Press, we had different arrangements with different authors. For example, we were doing a book on tying flies for bass fishing, which sounds very esoteric, but if you're into it, I guess you're into it. And the author wanted, we were doing it as a paperback, and the author wanted a certain number of copies printed in hardcover that he was willing to pay for. So that was a special arrangement that Countryman Press made with that author. So he paid for the hardcover printing. It's actually the same inside. What was different was the binding. So he was essentially paying for the overrun and he was paying for the binding. So he would have his special books. And he was free to do whatever he wanted with those books. We had another author, Howard Coffin, who wrote a book called Vermonters in the Civil War. Amazingly popular, much to my surprise, amazingly popular. And he made a special arrangement when we did it in hardcover, when the paperback was done, he made a special arrangement so that he could buy copies for himself at an extended discount. I think he actually got them for 25% off the retail, or sorry, 55% off retail, so we got the same discount as a bookstore. And that was because he spoke to reenactor groups all the time, and he could sell them in the back of the room. It was a sale, and the company was still making money. They were happy. So the smaller companies, the mid-sized companies, you can oftentimes make arrangements with them. There is a thing called partner publishing, where, and you have to be really careful about this, but there are some legit folks who are doing it. I know a woman here in Hanover who has done this, actually. She's on her.
Whose car is that?
The red one is mine.
It's right in a driveway. I need to move it. I'll move it for you. Sorry.
It
I'll just
is.
move it right behind me.
Yeah, can you drive standard?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please bring the keys back or I can't go home. So there are all kinds of arrangements that you can make in there. The thing of it is you need to discuss that before you sign a contract. I can't tell you how many agents have told me this, everything is negotiable. You have to ask. I know authors who have gone to large publishing houses and refused to take an advance because they want to make money on the royalties. So they don't have to pay anything back. So the royalties start with the sales of the book. Everything's negotiable, but you need to ask. Independent publishing means that you have now put on the publisher's hat as well as the author's hat. You are now financially responsible for everything. You're gonna find and pay an editor. If you're gonna do it legitimately, if you're gonna do it professionally, you're gonna find and pay an editor. And we will talk about that next week in a little bit more detail. You're going to pay to have the cover created. You're going to pay to have the, why is she going backwards? Sorry, oh, okay. I was gonna say. You're gonna own your own ISBNs. Digital printing, in places like this is the company that is now part of the Ingram Content Group. And they have one now that's just for individual authors as opposed to mid-sized publishers. Since I started with Lightning Source, I'm gonna stick with Lightning Source, but Lightning Source and Spark do virtually the same thing. It's just the size of the company that's involved. And books are printed as they are ordered. Just so that you understand how this works, if you want to buy a copy of this book and you go to Amazon, or you go to the Norwich bookstore and you order it from them, this is the way it works. We'll do the Amazon routine because it's just easier. Your order goes from your computer to Amazon. Amazon sends the order to not Ingram Spark, goes to Lightning Source. Lightning Source has a PDF of this portable document format sitting in its data file, and it goes, oh, one copy. The book is printed in less than a minute, bound in less than 2 minutes. It is put in an envelope with Amazon's return address on it and shipped to you. It never, ever goes to Amazon at all. Amazon never touches it, it just processes the order, one book at a time. If you want 20 copies of this because it's a wonderful book and you want to give it to everybody for Christmas, you can do that. I can sit in my jammies at 2 o'clock in the morning and I can order as many copies as I want. And they're printed as they are ordered. No warehousing. You have to understand how nice that is.
Sonia,
Yes.
is Amazon still taking 55%?
Yes. Yep.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah, every bookseller gets 55%. Do you remember a couple of years ago, there was this big fight about Amazon and rights and, you know, the public, okay. The big fight was actually this. Amazon takes that 55%, but you know how Amazon, they don't do it quite as ubiquitously anymore. But they used to be able to discount book prices for 30%. You used to see that. You don't see that as often anymore. And the reason was is that the publishers won that argument and forced Amazon not to discount their books. What they were doing is they were giving that discount to customers out of the 55% that they kept, and they can't do that anymore. That's the reason why books are not discounted. So in some ways, I think the customer's lost. Everybody clear? All right, we're rocketing through this stuff here. So, and I just wanted to point out that, you know, since 1438, we have not been able to do this as writers, so we can do it now.
So you can still market through Amazon?
I can market through Amazon if I want to pay them, yeah. Yeah. And there are, believe me, there's a ton of information out there and books out there that explain how to market on Amazon like a pro. Yeah. Just be careful, understand what it is that you're paying for. Marketing is, we could do, you know, a whole week's worth of classes on marketing. There are different kinds of independent publishers. There are those who don't care. They just slap their words on the page and the books look like that and they read like that. They're amateurs. Professionals actually take the standards that we've all learned from traditional publishing that were developed over centuries. I hope she's going to bring back my keys.
She did.
She put it right there.
She did.
Oh,
That's
thank
the
you.
That's the head, don't show
I
it.
really get into this. Professionals actually take the standards and apply them to their own work. That's not easy or inexpensive, but personally I think it's worth it because when I hand my books to my editor and it's time for her to do her thing, my instructions consist of exactly one sentence. Do not let me go out there and make a fool out of myself in public. It's just words, it's just digits. I can fix anything. What I need an editor for is to tell me what needs to be fixed because I've looked at it so much, I can't see it anymore. This is private publishing. also oftentimes they're called photo books. And this stuff has proliferated. Apple was actually the ones who pioneered this with something they called iBooks or iPhoto books. And they morphed and morphed and morphed and morphed and morphed. The companies have been bought and sold and so forth. But essentially, if you want to publish a book that you just want to be able to give to family and friends for a Christmas gift, something that's got a lot of pictures in it, you want to commemorate an event, you want to commemorate an anniversary, something like that, this is a wonderful way to go. You have to understand you can't sell these to the public, not that you're prevented legally, but they're so expensive to print that you can't make enough money on them. You can't price them at a price point that would allow you to make any
And
money.
Apple doesn't do it anymore.
Oh, yeah, they do.
No, they stopped as of September 30th through photos, because I do I've done a lot of photo books.
Ah,
And I was working on one when I found that out. I got it in September 27th, because they're
Good for
not
you.
doing the printing anymore.
good for you. I've used Shutterfly. Is this one Shutterfly? Yeah, I've used Shutterfly, and they're fun.
Yeah,
We're actually.
They're great books. It's so
They're
much fun.
beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. They're done on that nice clay-coated paper. They're full color.
They're beautiful, yeah.
You can do them hardcover, you can do them soft cover. What they provide for you is they provide the software
Mhm.
on their site that allows you to use your photos and your text together to produce the books
And your format.
and your format.
Format every page.
Yep, you can do every page different if
Yeah.
you want to.
So this
So-
would be good for a cookbook for a ladies group or something like that.
I wouldn't necessarily, now here's the thing, they're expensive to print per page, they're not cheap
Yeah.
at all, because they make all their money on printing. If I were gonna do a cookbook, I might choose a different way, because these are really made for color. And a cookbook isn't necessarily gonna have color, it could, but not necessarily, there are different ways to do that. One of the other sources, and I did not put it in the slides, but one of the other sources of being able to privately publish is to actually go to a place like Noman Copy or Staples. Noman Copy I know has the capability of making this type of binding. So you can actually print a book with them. I actually recommend this if you have never ever stuck your toe into the publishing water at all. I recommend doing something like this or doing a book that you get printed someplace locally like Amazon, like Noman Copy. You'll be amazed at how much you learn. Because when you open it up, and I can't explain the phenomenon, but I know it's true. When I look at my manuscripts here on the screen, I see it one way. I put it in something like this, I see it another way. If I put it on as an ebook and I read it as an ebook, I see it another way. I'm always amazed at how our perception changes. I write short stories every week for that appear on my website. When they're in my manuscript, I don't see typos. Of course, as soon as I put it on the website, I see typos. But this is a great way to learn how pages are designed and put together. It's very satisfying to be able to have something like that. I'm going to pass around these two. I actually did these two with lightning source, but it shows you some of the color work that they can do. But it's this size thing that I'm talking about. This is, by the way, the inside of this is not clay-coated paper. Clay-coated paper is the shiny, slippery kind that you get in art books.
With Apple Photo, you can, and you do a book or something, you can create a PDF from it.
Oh, nice, nice to know.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know if you can do that with Shutterfly, I've never bothered. One of the things that I'm doing for Christmas is my son and daughter-in-law have a nephew who's now 4, who's really into, right now he's just created a chocolate shop and he's working in a chocolate shop. He's got employees and everything. So his grandmother and I, who are friends, are getting together to create a children's book that's all about Nathan and his chocolate shop. That's going to be a Christmas present. So that's a wonderful place to be able to do something. This is also good for short books of poetry. I wouldn't do anything that has more than, what would you say, 24, 30 pages?
That's a lot, too.
Yeah, yeah. You get up to 30 pages, they're going to be expensive.
You're got 10 minutes left, lady.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I pretty much covered this, so I can skip that slide. And then we get into the Wild Wild West. Kindle was the pioneer for electronic books. About 20% of all books sold are electronic books. That number has been holding fairly steady over the last 4 or 5 years. Some people really hate them. Some people really like them. There are so many ways to publish an ebook. It is almost overwhelming. And when I say it's the Wild Wild West, I mean that. Things are consolidating and they're sugaring down, and certain formats and ways to do things are starting to appear that are more stable or appear more stable than others. We're going to get into that more. One of the things I like personally about ebooks is that you can correct them on the spot. I have 2 books about publishing that I have out there. The first one, called Your Book Your Way, I have just taken out of print as a book on paper because I'm going to put it on my website and sell it as an ebook. And the reason for that is this. I can't keep up in a paper book with the electronic publishing industry. But I could change that ebook on my website every single month and republish it so it would always be up to date. So there are certain advantages to that. One of the things that people seem to love about ebooks is the fact that they can be sized and resized so that if you want to read something in large print, you can do that. You can change the font. At this point in time, the color books, instructional how-tos, things like that, they don't seem to work quite as well on ebooks. Some people like them, but most people don't. The biggest seller overall in the ebook land is science fiction. Which to me sort of makes sense because if you're into science fiction, you'd be into technology, so to me this would be attractive. But this is just, it's an amazing new field and it really hasn't all sugared out yet, but anybody can learn the technology to do this. 2 things, because I want to be able to leave time for questions, 2 things. One of which is if you are a member of the Howe Library here in Hanover, Pat, you may know about this too. Through the Howe Library, you can access all the classes for lynda.com, and that's LYNDA.com. Lynda.com is it was the pioneer in educational classes online. And they have a class that is taught in every kind of technology or software program you can possibly think of. If you want to learn how to create your own ebooks, that would be a place to go if you are a member of the Howe. One of the things I like about lynda.com classes is they never die. You can go back and watch them and refer to them as you want. That's great. The other thing is just something that you should know about if you don't. If you have never been to the 5 Colleges book sale, which happens every April and has happened every April for over 50 years, if you would like to volunteer to be part of that, you get to sort books, go through all the different kinds of things. You get first dibs on books. You don't get, if you're a sorter, if you come and volunteer, you don't get a chance to buy them for a less price, but you do get first dibs, and it's wonderful. The sorting will start March, and it's a great, lot of fun. Anyway, questions? Oh, come on, folks. Yeah.
These portfolio books or something like this, I have 7 grandchildren, and at Christmas it's like, what do you do, 3 of them are in college. I have tons of pictures I took, tons, and they're clear, but nobody looks at albums anymore. And I'm sorting through these, and instead of putting them in some kind of special collage, if I were to do something like that and put pictures of the specific person, and send those out with text, would that be a proper use for this new stuff, for the Shutterfly stuff?
Yeah, I would think so. But yeah, I would keep the number of pages in the book down so that they're reasonably priced. They really are expensive.
And how expensive is it out? How much is?
Each one of these sites, if you type in photo books in Google, you will get an amazing number of companies who do that. They all print essentially the same. They're all using the same technology. So I don't think you can go wrong, whichever one you decide you're going to use. So it's just a matter of price.
They also come up with coupons if you kind of wait.
If you get your stuff ready.
Particularly with
Express
spelling, right?
interest in
40% off, 50% off, and then boom, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Could you, take your PowerPoint and send us a copy of it?
Sure,
That would really be helpful.
sure,
Yeah.
I'm sure I've
yeah,
missed.
glad to do that. You have to understand, this is the first keynote presentation I've ever made, so it may take me a little while to figure out how I do that, but I will.
Yeah, it's not very hard, and you can send it so that you have 4 slides on a
I
page.
promise I will try. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a wonderful presentation, just absolutely fabulous, because we speak in common parlance in ways that are different from the way you've been speaking. Okay, so typically if you're trying to sell a book these days, people will say to you, well, are you going to go through a publisher or are you going to self-publish? So when they're saying, are you going to self-publish, we're really talking in terms of advisable about independent publishing,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it was helpful for me to learn the distinction
Yes.
between self-publishing and independent
Yeah.
publishing.
That's the reason why I am always very specific about that, because to me, self-publishing means using a self-publishing company.
Company, okay.
Independent, and you will hear people use the term self-publishing to mean all of that. They will also use the term print on demand. Print on demand is no more than the printer that's sitting on your desk. That's what it is. Because in my world on Mac, I hit Command P, I've made a demand, and it prints. That's all it is. But most folks will use those terms interchangeably. They don't use the independent publishing. For purposes of this class, I always am very specific about that, because we're done talking about self-publishing. I'm not going to those companies anymore, but we're gonna talk a lot about independent publishing.
And in independent publishing, you'll probably do this next week, but in independent publishing, companies like Lightning Source, or which was the other one you referenced?
Amazon's CreateSpace.
Oh, okay. No, it was another one. I was thinking of Spark.
Yeah,
Autumn?
Ingram,
Ingram,
Lightning
Ingram.
Source and Ingram Spark, they're essentially both Ingram.
Okay.
Spark is used for individual authors. It's just they've made everything even more easy to use.
So they provide the tools for you to publish your own book, but you would own your own book?
Yes, you
So the
own-
LLC would be something, a subcategory of?
No, LLC has to do with business. If you want to set yourself up as an LLC, limited liability corporation, that's something you do through the state. You're in New Hampshire, right?
Right.
So you do it through Concord. You know, you're thinking of ISBN, the numbers?
Okay.
Okay,
And what, the author would own the ISBN, right?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
It's all, I love this thing that you put out. It's really clear, well done.
Great, there's a lot of websites on there. So here's your homework assignment. Actually, I just thought of a second one, so you're gonna have even more homework. I want you to go home and I want you to stand in front of your own bookshelves. And if you can, stand about 5-6 feet back and just look at the spines. I want you to pick out one spine that attracts your attention. It doesn't matter what the words are. Does it attract your attention? And then take another hard look and pick out the spine that does not attract your attention. Bring both of those books with you next week, because we're gonna do a little experiment. Okay? And also, the I think it's 5 pages that I sent out to you before, there's a lot of websites on there. Spend some time going out. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Sorry. That's Amazon. Yeah. Stop it. Never mind. Go on to Ingram Spark, INGRAM Spark, one word. And on their homepage, you will see menus going across the page. There's one, I believe it's resources. When you click on that, you get a drop-down menu. I believe the last item in that list says tools. What you can do with those tools is you can plug in the size of the book, the number of pages, how you want the book to be printed, and you can figure out how much it will cost to print that book and have it shipped. They will do it for you. You can go into what they call publisher's compensation, which is how much money you would make on that book. So you can go in and you can set the size of the book, you can set whether it's black and white or color on the inside, how many pages it has, and then you can set the price. You can say, this book is, I think this one is $14.95? Yeah, this one's $14.95. So if I went in and I was thinking about this book, I would say it's a 6x9, it's all black and white on the inside. I chose cream colored paper because I like cream colored paper. I have a glossy cover. It's perfect bound, you're gonna need to know that, perfect bound. It's paperback. And I'm gonna charge $14.95 for it. And then you hit the button and it will calculate how much the publisher's compensation is. So you will know right up front how much money you would make per sale of this book. One of the things you need to know about Ingram Spark and Lightning Source is that all of their books automatically go right into Amazon. I don't have to do anything else. I can sell internationally. In my jammies, at my computer, at my desk. I can sell books in the UK, I can sell them in Western Europe, and I can sell them throughout Asia through Lightning Source. One of the big differences, so that you know, between Lightning Source and Spark, they're really virtually the same company, and Amazon, bookstores will not sell books that were printed by CreateSpace in Amazon. I'm sure you can figure out why. And I have a present for each one of you. I brought in copies of this book on publishing that I wrote. This is a workbook to be able to figure out how much things cost. And I brought one in for everybody. Oh. Please, take one and pass it along.
This is wonderful.
This is awesome. Thank you.